Hello, thank you so much for joining us. It is my great pleasure to be here with the playwright of the fabulous play that you just heard read, George Brant. Thank you so much, George, for joining us today.
No, of course, it's my pleasure. I didn't know I was coming afterwards. Okay, so
Yes, yes.
people know what I'm talking about, right?
No worries about spoilers. Yeah.
That's good. That's
Um,
good.
can you tell us where you're joining us from?
Yes, I'm currently in snowy Cleveland, Ohio, where I guess lived the past 10 years or so. My wife Laura Kepley runs the Cleveland Playhouse, which is kind of the flagship here in Cleveland. So that's what brought us here about 10
Wonderful.
years ago, or 10 and a half.
And does Cleveland indeed rock?
It does. I mean, it really does.
So I would love to just jump right into this fabulous play that we just got to read and our audiences got to experience.
No,
And
sure.
I'm wondering where'd the idea for it come from?
Well, as I mentioned, Laura's with the Cleveland Playhouse, and just before I started writing the play, they had their 100th anniversary. They were turning 100 years old. And as a result, a lot of the history of the theater was floating around, and people were doing different history projects to share. And in fact, they commissioned, I think, 10 writers to write something in each decade of the theater's existence. And I was assigned to do the 40s. And yeah, at first I was just hearing stories. Like, I didn't realize that, like, the theater had never gone dark, just as in the play, and had, stayed open through the Depression and through the wars. And that alone was very interesting to me, just that concept. And then I did further research. Luckily, we have a vast amount of research possible here. The Women's Committee of Cleveland Playhouse kept great records, and in fact have these huge scrapbooks, sometimes like 3 per year, of the plays of the theater's existence up to like the 70s or 80s when they kind of stopped. And those scrapbooks are held by Case Western Reserve University. So I went to the library and checked out a few years of these books and flipped through them. And they have all the original reviews for the plays and any article that was written about them in the newspaper. The Women's Committee notes, you see the typed notes. So it was great to get the firsthand history of that. And to really see how the women stepped up and kind of, took over the theater to a certain extent, because just as in the play, all the men, able-bodied men, are away. And then, and I got to really dig into the plays they were doing during that time. They weren't quite as radical as Breeches. They were doing these plays that I haven't heard of since, but Nine Women was one title, I think, and Two Old Ladies. And then it was all these, like, maybe not those exciting titles, but it pretty much spelled it out. So they were using, and they would even bring the same plays back when they needed Nine Women to run again.
Did you get a chance to read any of those plays?
I did, and I should really look them up.
I wonder if they.
Yeah, they might not hold up, but
they might not hold up.
Yeah, but they had even a lot of pictures too of the of each production. So you had so you got an idea of Nine Women. It seemed like there were some good fights going on, but maybe they were in a rooming house. I was trying to make up the story, and then they had during the war, the Women's Committee kept track of every serviceman who had been involved with the theater, and sent them monthly a package of chocolate, cigarettes, and all the playbills for the shows that Cleveland was putting on. And then there were letters back from the servicemen. Really, there was one in particular where it just stated, thank you for remembering me, and really said, the chocolates and cigarettes are great, but what really gives me the most optimism is the playbills, and just knowing that the theater's still around, the theater that brought me such joy, knowing that, we write something about, like, we're only tearing apart things here. It's lovely to think of a time where we built things together, and worked on these shows. So there's really moving letters, and I think you hear those phrases of, we have to know what we're fighting for, or that kind of thing. But to see it actually written in a letter really brought home that's a real thing. So anyway, I had all this, dug up all this material and really got intrigued by it. And at the time, I had a commission out with Trinity Repertory Company in Providence. And a commission being, for those who don't know, sometimes a theater will commission a playwright to write a play. Sometimes they have a lot of stipulations. It has to be about, Susan B. Anthony or whatever.
Yep.
But Trinity's case, they hadn't given me really any parameters except to write it for their ensemble. And so then I thought that this could work for them. So the play is kind of a combination, I guess, of these two theaters that I knew very well and their histories. In fact, Trinity had recently done the Henriade, maybe 8 years earlier. So that was kind of partly how that snuck in there. And also the feeling that doing a war play, seemed to make sense for the play at large.
I was going to ask about the Henriade. I was just
Oh yes,
chatting with our director for the reading, and Andrew Philpott, and
very
we're both Shakespeare nerds.
Oh yes, good.
And he was talking about how it's so cool that you've chosen the Henriade, not only because of the overlap of the war periods, but also because the Henriade is so just inherently masculine. There are two roles for women, and so I was wondering sort of where the choice for that particular
and that definitely was part of it too, the fact that it is almost exclusively a male world in those plays. And really, part of it was wanting to write for the women of Trinity, and wanting to give them the opportunities that they haven't had before, potentially, as you say, to do some of these soliloquies that they wouldn't have any reason to have touched, and to do a sword fight, which almost never happens between two women. After, I can't remember if this was after we opened. I think it was after our closing night party. I believe it was Phyllis Kay, one of the actors at Trinity, who said, all right, George, well, the secret's now out. The male parts really are better. After she's had the opportunity. So it was a lot of fun, and it's been fun to see that, having seen a few of the productions, to see the women in the cast really take on these roles, and to see, I don't know, what it brings out, and to see these great sword fights, which have all been really different. So anyway, I think I started out as an actor, so I think I know that part of what drives my writing is wanting to give people good parts. So if I feel that I've done that, I've done my job.
That's fabulous, and you're dovetailing right into the next question I'm interested in. This has been, this play has been quite successful around the country, and I'm sure you've seen a number of different productions. I'm wondering if there's sort of any variations that stand out in how people choose to produce the play, or anything.
Yeah, there aren't many descriptions, stage directions per se. So the presentation has been a little different for each one, for sure. And then, I originally wrote it for Trinity, and then I wasn't sure and part of me was like, well, I had a lot of fun researching all the war history for Providence in particular, which I didn't know at all. And I thought it might be a fun idea to allow other productions to make it their own in that way. So for Cleveland, to set the play in Cleveland, et cetera. And so I actually created this glossary in the back of the play, so to let producers know, like, okay, this line should be replaced here by X, by a local watering hole or whatever. So there is a glossary to do that. I've gone ahead and done like the localization for a few versions in Chicago and here in Cleveland. And then I had the pleasure of seeing it in St. Louis, where I hadn't done those myself. And it was just a lot of fun to hear people laugh at local references that I didn't know. Was kind of fun. It reminded me of, I got to go to Ireland once and go to the Abbey Theatre, and it was Philadelphia, Here I Come was the play by Brian Friel, and they were
Yeah.
just laughing and laughing at stuff that I didn't know. I had no idea what the jokes were, and I kind of had that same feeling when I saw it in St. Louis. And kind of enjoyed it. That the feeling that it was so local. In that way.
I'm trying to think of what our local references here on the Central Coast would be.
Right. Yes.
I can think of a few.
Yeah.
But,
yeah. It's been interesting. I mean, for me, I think the war history of. I mean, you kind of think, okay, we're going to war. I don't know. I think I had a silly idea that each city was doing the same thing to help, but it really is pretty radically different. I mean, Rhode Island was all about training people, for the Navy, and PT boats were created there. And so it was very much, focused on the water. And then here in Cleveland, the steel industry, we're building heavy, planes and huge battleships. And so it's been really fun to learn that history and to learn what everyone contributed, as well as the comedy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can't forget that.
And speaking of local references, you said that you got to rewrite it for Chicago. Now, are you originally from the Chicago area?
Yes, that's right. I was born in Maryland, but spent most of my youth in the Chicagoland area.
And you said that you started as an actor. How did you come to playwriting?
Yeah, I studied acting at Northwestern University, and then moved into Chicago, and then for about 10 years, I guess, was acting. Well, I started out just acting, and then it became acting and writing, and then by the end of it, just writing. Basically, I kind of felt, as you may, have some inkling of, I just wasn't getting the parts that I wanted. And I was like, I can do more than that. That was kind of what started. I had done writing before that, some in college. And really kind of, so my first few plays were totally selfish, just written for me to perform in, basically. So they were tailor-made for myself. And then as time went on, I picked up an ensemble of actors who we all enjoyed working together. So I kind of started writing for them instead of myself. And then I used to direct them as well, and then met Laura, who was a much better director than I am. And so she became director, and then I kind of became pretty much exclusively writer. Those were more comedies. I kind of started out really writing pretty silly, satirical stuff. And then things got all serious somewhere down the line. And then Breeches was a lot of fun, just as a kind of return to a comedy, and which I tell you does put you in a much better mood when you're working on something 6 hours a day, much more fun.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and a return to comedy. I know that
Yes.
you've had many successful serious plays, and one that I'm thinking of is your incredible one-woman show, Grounded.
Oh, yes,
And
yes.
I just would love to hear a little bit about that in our community. We're located right next to the Vandenberg Air Force Base, and
Oh, very good. Yeah.
so Grounded, the story of a female drone pilot. I'm wondering what the genesis for that was.
Yeah, that came about really like just a general interest in the drones, and wondering how they worked. And when I started the play, they were still a top secret program, kind of an open secret. I mean, we as civilians knew they were operating, but we didn't know much about them. So I remember at one point reading that President Obama had used them, I think 8 times in his first 3 months. Obama had used them 8 times as often as Bush had in his 8 years. So when I read that, I was like, oh, wow, okay. Feeling, I think, in some ways culpable, as somebody who had voted for President Obama. I was like, oh, okay, well, then I voted for this, as well as everything else. And so I just wanted to know, what was this program and how did it work? And then that led me, it's hard to write about a machine. So I didn't know quite how to enter the play until reading about the pilots. Actually, really, what really hooked me were the Stars and Stripes magazine, which is kind of an in-house magazine for, those in the service. And they had a pretty heavy presence online, and anybody could read their issues, which I found a little strange, but hey, whatever. They were being very forthright about the amount of PTSD that these drone pilots were having. And, I just found that very strange and something I was curious about and wanted to explore more, and wondered, and then reading about their daily lives, that they didn't go to barracks overseas, that they pilot these planes from right here in America, which I didn't know it when this started either, that they're piloting these planes, thousands of miles away, which seems so science fiction, that they, worked, 12 hours and then go home. And this idea of going home after a war, and just was really intriguing to me too. So as anyone who's seen the play knows, that that obviously is where my focus ended up, and just this idea of kind of how can the psyche handle that much breakdown, or how much compartmentalization, I guess, can somebody handle, before that starts to break down.
That's fabulous, and so brilliantly crafted and powerful.
Thanks.
And you say that you started writing roles for yourself, and one of the things that selfishly I love, as as somebody who's an actress, you write incredibly for women. I think that it just
thank
is
you.
so fabulous. Into the Breeches, Grounded, and how did you decide to make the pilot a female?
Trying to remember all the steps, but I know that at the time, and this was another, I guess commissions are a good thing, because now I'm bringing them up again. But I had a commission for a theater that was an all-female theater run by 3 women, and they had never acted in a play together. One had directed, and one, had acted, one produced. And so they had asked me to write a play for all 3 of them. So I knew I had that commission out. So I think, roles for women were in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like, oh, maybe this drone play could be that play. So initially I was trying to think of, who are the 3 women at the heart of this drone play? But I just couldn't find I couldn't find who the other 2 people were, other than the pilot. And then I started to think about, well, what if it was a one-person show? And then a bunch of ideas started flying at me about how that might work. And so I went ahead, and even though I knew that wasn't what they asked for, I kind of wrote it and kind of hoped that they would take it. But they were firm and said, it's got to be for 3 people. So then it kind of came back to me, and then I was able to send it out wherever I wanted to, and all that. So that was kind of how it started. But I don't know if I would have written it for a male. I kind of feel like the story of war has been such a male one. Like we for thousands of years, that's the way we know war. I think to me, it was much more exciting, and I think makes an audience approach the play differently. I think if it was a guy who'd be like, okay, here's another war story. There's a lot of preconceptions that we would enter into the play with. And like for me, when I see a war story, I kind of need to know what's different for me to care. Like I've seen so many, like, okay, what's different about this one? And I feel like with Grounded, with a female pilot, with a female drone pilot on top of it, it's a bunch of things that perhaps that haven't been overdone, that we haven't seen before. So hopefully it allows the audience to kind of enter in immediately without a bunch of preconceived notions, and kind of see everything afresh.
Yeah, that was exactly my experience when I got to see the play.
As it's just funny how some plays click and some don't, or I guess sometimes the world premiere of something is a little easier to get than the second production. That I think theaters, like to have that world premiere title, but then after that, there's no glory, I guess, in being the fourth person to do a play. So
you don't get your name in the front of the script.
right,
Yeah,
right. So yeah, so it's just strange how some hit at the moment, like Grounded, and Breeches too, and so both of those have had, luckily enough, to have multiple productions, but I've got plenty that, have had 0 to, 1.
An additional question for you. How has, from the time that you wrote Grounded to now, have you felt like its resonance has shifted in any way, or?
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, happily, when I was, when I read the play to Laura and working with great dramaturg Erica Nagel, kind of moved away from the specificity of it that it originally had. Originally, it was very much in Afghanistan, and Hamid Karzai was mentioned, as happily, they kind of pushed, suggested making it a little more vague as far as where we are, or more mythic. I don't know. It feels more mythic to me because of that. We just have the desert and the desert, the sky. It's all these kind of primal and eternal things. And unfortunately, also, we're still fighting these wars.
Well, and then coming back to Into the Breeches, I loved the play when I first read it just a couple of years ago, but then as I was revisiting it in this past year, which has felt like 5 years, and the opening scene of them walking into a dark theater that hasn't been performed. I mean, I started to cry. It was just so resonated in a different way in this moment. And
I think that one's going to have a completely different feel when we come back for. I didn't even really think about that opening moment.
Got me.
But it's true. I was thinking of, that of that idea that we'd never close the theater. Okay, here's something that did manage to close most theaters. And that aspect of, I think another thing that appealed to me in writing the play was that looking back to a time when we were really, united as a country, and let's work together and let's figure out how to do this together. And I think I wrote it during a particularly, partisan time, and so that appealed to me, that idea. And now, it's interesting. Like, even if you did the play 8 months ago or something, there was that feeling of, okay, we're all in this together, great, and then now unfortunately it feels like we're kind of drifting back into our camps. But so I think that will also have an interesting feel when the play hopefully comes back sooner than later to the world.
Yeah. We say here that the stages are dark, but the lights are definitely still on. And that, the fact that I get to sit here and talk with you and hear your insights, and that we still got to experience your fabulous play today. I'm, certainly don't take that for granted, but looking forward to a time when the Oberon and the Marion can have its full lights on again. So thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us.
Pleasure.
And your insight.
And thank you
Say hi to Cleveland for us.
Introducing the play to your audience.
Our pleasure, George. Thank you.